Well, we did it, folks. We did it. We made it to another week. We are here for another episode of the Rec Poker Podcast. Thank you all for joining me so much. I want to thank website AMP and, of course, Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. My name's Jim Reed, Bluffsterini in the home game. And if you want to find out about me, you can go to rec.poker/crew, because that's where you can find out all about the wrecking crew and the other fine folks that are on it, including these two fine folks that are joining me tonight. Fine folks, why don't you share a little bit about yourself with the Rec Poker Nation?
I'm John Somsky, and I am Poker Geek MN everywhere.
I'm Kim Kilroy. I'm Fergie56 in the home game, and I am Pet Bet everywhere else.
And just like every week, we are battling it out in the nightly home game, trying to steal each other's chips and get one step closer to that elusive and coveted silver pin. And just like every week, we are taking a post from the Rec Poker forums, and we're talking about it here on the show. So tonight, we are looking at a post by Chappo, one of our Australian members, who wins the Drove Furthest to Be Here Tonight award. He's not actually in the booth, unfortunately. We like it when Choi joins us, but we didn't get him tonight. I happen to know we'll be talking to him again sometime soon, though. So this is a post in the forums that Troy wrote. The subject says, "Final table hand. Every part of this made me uncomfortable in so many levels." And that is something that will happen on final tables from time to time, because you get into some pretty gross spots. So I'll cover the action here, and then we'll talk about a few comments that were made in the forums. Again, we're not going to be able to cover all the great stuff that goes on in the forums here. You really should go to rec.poker, get a free account. All it takes is an email and a smile, and then you can go and check out the forums yourself. You can see all the great feedback that everybody puts there, ask your own questions, and premium members are welcome to come join the show and share your thoughts right here with the rest of the Rec Poker Nation. So we'll go through the action anyway, but you should go check it out yourself. You'll get a lot more out of it. So in this case, Chappo, our friend Troy, gets dealt the 10 of clubs and the 10 of diamonds and raises. At this point, the blinds are at 400,000, 800,000. This is a final table, as we say. Raises 120,000 to 200,000 total. I think I screwed up the math there a little bit, but the raise is 120 to 200.
2.5 big blinds.
2.5 big blinds. Yes. Perfect.
From a 47 big blind stack, I think.
And that's really important because, as you know, when you get to the final table, the chip stacks are crucial and it really matters. This is where ICM pressure comes to play. We talked a bit about ICM over the last few weeks, and this is going to be a great example of that. So we open to 2.5. We get a call. There's a 3-bet up to 680,000. So about 3.5 times the stack that we put in.
Really? I thought it was like 6 big blinds.
Let me see. What
we raised to 200,000. He makes it 680, so yeah, maybe 7. Okay, yeah, that's good.
And then
8 big blinds, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah. And then the hero calls, and the original caller as well also calls. So we're 3-headed going to the flop, and we get and we are first action. So we get a pretty good flop for pocket tens. The flop's the 9 of clubs, 3 of diamonds, 4 of spades. So it's a rainbow flop, 9 high with the low straight on the table, but really not much else. And in a 3-bet pot, that low straight shouldn't really be too much of a factor when you're factoring in people's hands.
Kim, I think it's important to mention here, because we're at final table and we've got pay jumps with every position. We do have a short stack on the table. They're not in this hand, and there's a short stack with about 10 big blinds on the table. So I think that's really important to note here, because everybody else has 30 big blinds or more, I think.
Great point. And it really, I can't reinforce this enough. It doesn't matter that player is not in the hand, because it's a final table situation. Just their presence at the table should affect Troy's strategy in this hand, because there's as we'll see, there's a real incentive for Troy and the other players to let this player lose first, and to ladder up and get a bigger payout. So just like we talk about anticipation being a skill that we can use pre-flop, knowing what the ICM situation is something you have to have in your mind, not just with the players that are in the hand, but just all the players that are at the table. So in this case, the flop comes 9 of clubs, 3 of diamonds, 4 of spades. We're holding 10-10. And I think we're going to be checking to the aggressor with almost our entire range here, I would expect, in a 3-bet pot like this that's gone multi-way. And that's what Hero does. Chappo checks. The original caller checks as well. And then the 3-better makes a bet of 775, about almost 800,000, about half pot, which is slightly larger than the original 3-bet. Hero calls, and this is the really interesting spot. So then the middle position player who called in the first time re-raises a shove. So before we even get into the future action, the board is 9, 3, and 4. This player called an open raise, then they called a 3-bet, then they checked the flop, and now they've shoved over the C-bet. So the C-better folds, and it's back to us. And we're sitting there with the lowest possible overpair, which I think we have under-repped a bit by the action. So what are we thinking in this spot? There's so many things we could be thinking about. We could be thinking about where we are in distribution of our own range. We could be thinking about the range of the player that's made this check shove. What else should we be thinking about? And what's at the top of our minds now, you guys?
This board, I was just going to say, this board is not real conducive to a lot of hands. It doesn't hit a lot of hands called pre-flop. So when I see that shove, I'm thinking either a larger overpair or a set. Mm-hmm. Because I mean, you could have something like a 5-6, but that's so unlikely to be calling this pre-flop, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. In an ICM situation like this, it's hardly ever an overpair either. Like, what overpair is it except maybe jacks? Mm-hmm. Like queens would have probably raised you when you raised pre-flop. Yep. Queens, kings, and aces. Maybe pocket jacks call in an ICM situation. But are they ever going to shove when the 3-better pre-flop has all the overpairs? Are they ever going to put their entire stack at risk in an ICM situation? There's no 2 pairs that they could possibly have on this. And this just screams a set to me. Like, it just screams a set. Like, it almost can't be anything else. Like, I can't think of a possible bluff it can be. Like,
right,
even
it's
if
not
it
a
is
very
an
good
overpair,
board for a butt.
Right. If it's jacks, they're beating 10s anyway. Right. So I can't think of a possible hand that could be bluffing here. If we had a flush draw on there, then I could say maybe 5-6 suited with a backdoor flush draw. But we have a rainbow flop. We have 9, 3, 4 in an ICM spot, and it's just not likely for these players to get it in, to put their whole stack at risk like that without something like a set.
And I think we can even say, even if he does have exactly 5-6, that's the only hand that we're beating here. And it actually has decent equity against us. It's not like it's got 8 clean outs there to the nuts. I mean, if that's the case, is there enough bluff combos in the range given the odds?
I can't think of any.
Right.
Can you think of any?
I can't. And so we're in a position where we've got, in a way, a really, really perfect bluff catcher, right? Like, we're blocking some of those top pair hands, those 9-10 hands that they might choose to do it with. And we're beating all the draws. we don't really have, we got 2 outs to improve when we're behind. But is this a spot where our opponent's range even just has enough bluffs in it to be playing a bluff catcher? It's tricky. I always struggle in these spots where someone's made a c-bet in a board that they should be c-betting at a high frequency, and that kind of creates an opportunity to bluff raise. And so some players are only going to do that with good bluffing candidates, but some of them are just going to say, well, I'm just going to bluff this guy, and they're going to do it with anything, and they're going to be like, well, he has to fold. And it makes me wonder, like,
that's rare at a final table, though, with ICM.
Oh,
people are pretty relatively honest in a lot of ways, or they have huge equity to their bluffs. Like, they have huge equity.
That's a great point.
I'd like to take this back to the pre-flop action, if we can.
Yeah,
which you whipped through pretty quick.
I did. All right, well, tell you what, Kim, let's hear what Jonathan Little has to say about this, and then we'll get right back into that pre-flop action.
Wondered whether you should call a pre-flop raise or 3-bet instead.
What
do you do when you have a flush draw? Do you raise it, or do you just call? What do you do with ace king when you miss the flop? Are you tired of guessing about what the right play is with your particular hand? Well, my name is Jonathan Little, and I am a 2-time World Poker Tour champion and creator of PokerCoaching.com, where we offer over 1,000 interactive hand quizzes where you play a hand and then get real-time feedback from our world-class pros. Don't guess and don't stress. Just register for your free account at PokerCoaching.com/recpoker right now.
There you go. Thank you, Jonathan. So Kim, yeah, I did blow right past that pre-flop. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, let's go back to pre-flop. So we have a standard open with our 10s, and we have a flat call, which at final table is rarely a trap, like with an overpair too. I mean, like we said before, it could be jacks perhaps, depending on we don't have any player reads that he's told us about, so we're not sure about that. But it's usually a fairly honest hand that wants to hit something, right? Like
yeah, I think that's right.
A speculative hand. And then we have a raise, and then it comes back to us. And I think we have a decision here whether we set mine or whether we just go all in ourselves. We have the flat collar dead money in there, and we have the razor squeezing. And depending on this player's profile at that table, if this is a fairly active player, I think we can just rip our own stack in there to put pressure on both of the players with all of the dead money in there. If we're going to just call here, we have to fold if we don't hit a set.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're just set mining.
Yep. I think that's a really good point. And we were just talking about 4-betting in last week's episode. And, some people, they're afraid to put hands like this in their 4-betting range because if he has an aces or kings or queens kind of hand, you're kind of dominated. But that's why you're choosing these spots where you think your opponent has hands like ace king and ace queen and other kind of stuff that maybe they'll even fold some of it. Some of the stuff you're actually doing pretty well against. And they're under ICM pressure too, right? Like there's real value to being the one that put in the all-in raise. People will fold better hands.
Right. We can make all of those Broadway cards over our 10s fold.
Mm-hmm.
We're probably not making, and we may even make jacks fold.
Yeah. Yeah.
With the short stack on the table, this is where this is a key kind of maneuver. But when we have to be so careful when we just flat call, because now we're just turning our 10s into a set mine. And when we don't hit our set, we should never be putting our chips in the middle.
Yeah, I think that's a good insight. And we don't really have the right odds to be set mining at that depth, if that is the way we're playing it. It doesn't mean that that's like, we have a lot of equity in the hand. So that, and because it's a final table, like, I don't think it's nothing wrong with kind of deviating from the norm to take an exploitative spot, but that's even more of an argument for just shoving it in my experience, in my case.
That's why I far prefer the shove here with the dead money from the flat collar.
Yeah.
I far prefer the shove here.
And
because the range of hands that you're going to make your opponent fold is so much greater than the hands that they're going to call off with.
And there's a pretty good pot there already, right? To pick that up.
Right.
You know, that's very valuable.
Yeah. And you're going to be out of position for the hand.
Yeah.
So as played.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. Poker is hard. We got a good comment in here from Eric Jin Binkley, who's our newest Wrecking Crew member. I don't know if I'm breaking news here on the show. I might have mentioned it last week, but yeah, Kim, we've got a newest member of the Wrecking Crew. Eric's been hosting the Peel events on Wednesday night. That have been a lot of fun. So Eric Binkley writes in here, there's a lot of ICM pressure being the middle stack with 47 big blinds with the shorty still left there. And he also seems to say that as played at the end, it's hard to fold here. But being aggressive pre-flop in single raised pots is different than being post-flop in multi-way 3-bet pot, which is a good point. Like, this player has chosen this spot to take this line post-flop in this multi-way spot. I think, as Kim said earlier, there's just not going to show up with a lot of bluffs there, given that it's the final table. This might not be as prestigious event as like the monthly Tournament of Champions or Rec Poker battling it out for a silver pin, but I'm sure that nevertheless there's a lot of money on the line here, and it matters to these guys and gals how they do.
Did we tell the listeners how the hand went?
Oh no, we didn't. So as it ends up happening, yeah. So we get the check raise, the original better folds, and then Troy calls. And the other player did end up having a set of threes, and which was one of those hands that they're likely to have in that spot. And as it turned out, the player that folded would have rivered a flush, I think. So that's all the interesting information that we get out of there. Yeah, these final table hands are very interesting because I think people as a rule kind of don't really assign the right kind of ICM value to the different stacks at the table. And I think this is a spot where, yeah, Troy could have really turned that ICM pressure instead of a liability into a strength by coming back over the top there. Even if you think that original 3-better is going to have a pretty strong range. If they have that strong a range, just fold. You don't really get in the right odds to set mine, even though it sounds crazy to do it at a final table folding pocket tens. If the action tells you you're not going to win by the end of the hand, just don't get involved in the hand. Wait for a better spot.
Yeah, that's why I said it was like a sort of a read on the opponent. This is an active, sort of a more aggressive opponent that's taking they have the big stack on the table and they're taking a lot of these spots to squeeze in. Then I think it's a better spot for us to come over the top pre-flop with the dead money from the flat collar in there.
Yeah.
To put the ICM pressure back on them.
I love that. And listen, sometimes you're going to lose. Sometimes you're going to lose. Sometimes you're going to lose the tournament and you're going to think, damn, why did I 4-bet shove my tens in this spot where of course he's going to call me with aces and kings and queens. But the fact is, you make a lot of money on those other hands when he folds. You make money when he calls and you win, whether you deserve to or not. Like whether he had ace king and no ace or king came, or he had aces or kings and a 10 came. Like, just do the math. If it works out better in the long run, it works out better in the long run. But yeah, you're going to go home sometimes. But that's going to be true every time you don't put your chips in with the nuts. And applying fold equity at a final table, it's a great way to make sure that you don't have to go home quite just as soon as you would otherwise, because you got to pick up chips here too and ladder up. So that's good.
And it works much better when there is a short stack at the table.
Yeah.
Everybody's waiting to go out next.
Yeah.
So.
And I guess it also matters if I don't recall if Troy actually covered that player or
no,
if
the
that
other player covered
Troy.
Yeah.
But it was still a big chunk of their stack. And so they didn't want to lose that hand. They don't want to lose that hand and be the new short stack at the table either. So even though you don't cover them, that doesn't mean you're not threatening their stack, which people will factor in. All right. Well, any other thoughts, gang, on this particular hand? I'd like to thank Troy for writing it in. Of course, John Somsky and Kim Kilroy for joining me in the group. Kevin, thanks for being here in the chat. And, oh no, Website Amp and Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. Okay, thanks everybody. See you.